Have you ever felt that sudden tightness in your chest when someone casually says, "I'm coming over"? You smile. You say, "Yeah, sure. Come by." But inside your head, something whispers, "There goes my peace." If you know that feeling, trust me, you're not strange. You're not rude. And you're definitely not alone. Today, we're diving into the psychology of why some people hate having guests over, even when they genuinely like the people walking through the door. Because for some people, hosting is fun. The laughter, the noise, the shared energy. But for others, home means something completely different. Home is sacred. It's the only place where the mask comes off, where your breathing slows down, where the world stops asking you to be anything. And when someone enters that space, even a friend, something subtle shifts. The air feels different. The silence breaks. A low-level tension creeps in, not because you dislike the guest, but because your sanctuary has been interrupted. So why does it feel like such a small invasion? Psychologically, people who value solitude often experience something called territorial comfort. Their home isn't just a building. It's an emotional reset button. Every sound, every object, every routine inside that space is familiar, predictable, controlled. So when a guest arrives, the brain reacts the same way it would if someone dropped a pebble into a perfectly still pond. Nothing terrible happens, but the ripples change everything. And there's another layer most people don't see. Some people don't just relax at home, they recover there. Out in the world, they're polite, they're aware, they're socially on, but at home, they finally get to stop performing. So when someone comes over, even someone they care about, the mask goes right back on. And that emotional effort drains them quietly, like a battery losing percentage in the background. Here's something most people will never admit out loud. Some of the kindest, warmest, most considerate people are the ones who feel the deepest relief the moment the door closes behind a guest. Not because they're antisocial, not because they're cold, but because silence feels like oxygen. For them, quiet isn't emptiness, it's regulation. Psychologists say people like this often have strong emotional boundaries. They don't push others away. They simply protect the spaces that help them stay whole. To them, home isn't a stage. It isn't performance. It's who they are when no one is watching. And once you understand that, this reaction stops looking selfish and starts looking intelligent. Because in a world that constantly demands access to you, protecting your inner space isn't rejection, it's survival. And in the next part, we're going to talk about where this sensitivity often comes from, and why it's more common in deeply caring people than anyone realizes. For many people, this sensitivity didn't come out of nowhere, it was learned. Growing up, home wasn't always a place of rest. Sometimes it was where guests meant noise, pressure, expectations, where visits brought stress instead of comfort. Where you had to behave, adjust, stay alert. So your nervous system learned something early. Home equals safety. Visitors equal disruption. And even now, years later, that old wiring still activates. It doesn't matter if the guest is kind. It doesn't matter if you like them. Your body remembers what your mind doesn't consciously think about anymore. This is why the reaction feels automatic. That slight tightening in your chest. That quiet countdown until the visit ends. You're not being dramatic. Your nervous system is protecting a space it associates with recovery. And here's the part that confuses people the most. This trait often shows up in people who are deeply empathetic, people who give a lot, who listen carefully, who notice moods, shifts, emotional undercurrents. When someone enters your home, you don't just offer them a seat. You offer attention, awareness, presence, and that costs energy. So while others can host without thinking twice, you feel the invisible weight of being on again. This is why many people like you prefer meeting friends outside the house. Cafes, parks, neutral spaces, places where you can connect, without giving up your inner refuge. Because in those spaces you can leave. At home you can't, and that difference matters. Psychologists often describe this as strong boundary awareness. You're not shutting people out. You're choosing where and how connection happens. That's a healthy skill, not a flaw. But society doesn't always see it that way. There's an unspoken rule that says if you don't invite people in, you must be distant, cold, closed off. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Some of the most emotionally available people are the ones who guard their space the most carefully. Because they know what happens when they don't. Burnout, resentment, emotional exhaustion that builds quietly over time. Protecting your home is how you stay kind, how you stay patient, how you stay yourself. And this is the shift most people never make. They confuse access with intimacy, presence with closeness. But you understand something subtler. Real connection doesn't require constant availability. It requires authenticity. And authenticity is easiest when you're not overwhelmed. That's why your comfort often looks simple. A familiar chair, a quiet room, a cup of tea. The soft hum of your own thoughts. Those things regulate you. They bring you back to baseline. And when you're regulated, you can show up for others in a way that's real. In the next part, we're going to talk about why wanting to protect your space doesn't make you selfish, and how learning to honor this need actually changes your relationships for the better. Here's where things usually get complicated. Not because you don't know what you need, but because you've been taught to feel guilty for needing it. You notice it the moment you hesitate before saying no. The mental bargaining. The explanations you prepare in advance. The urge to soften your boundaries so no one feels rejected. Because somewhere along the way you learned that protecting your space might hurt someone. But here's the truth most people never hear. Boundaries are not walls. They're filters. They don't keep love out, they keep resentment from getting in. When you say yes to having someone over, even though your body is already tense, you're not being generous. You're spending energy you don't have. And your nervous system knows it. That's why the visit feels longer than it is. Why you're mentally counting the minutes. Why relief floods in the moment the door closes. Not because the guest was unpleasant, but because you were overriding yourself the entire time. Psychologists often point out that chronic guilt around boundaries is a sign of emotional over-responsibility. You're not just aware of other people's needs. You feel responsible for their comfort, so you host when you don't want to. You explain when you don't owe one. You sacrifice peace to maintain harmony. But harmony built on self-erasure doesn't last. It turns into exhaustion, into irritability you can't explain, into distance that confuses the very people you were trying to protect. This is the paradox. When you ignore your need for space, you become less present, less patient, less yourself. When you honor it, you actually show up better. This is why learning to say no without guilt changes everything. Not dramatically, quietly. You stop overextending. You stop apologizing for having limits. You stop confusing access with affection. And something unexpected happens. Your relationships improve. Because the time you do spend with people is chosen, not forced, not endured. Connection becomes intentional instead of draining. And the people who truly understand you, they feel the difference. They sense that when you say yes, you mean it. That your presence is real, not obligatory. And for the ones who don't understand, that discomfort isn't your failure. It's the natural friction that appears when someone is used to unlimited access and suddenly meets a boundary. And that friction isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Protecting your space doesn't mean you love people less. It means you respect yourself enough to stay regulated. And regulated people don't lash out. They don't burn out. They don't disappear without explanation. They remain kind because they're not overwhelmed. In the final part, we're going to bring all of this together. Why guarding your home isn't antisocial behavior. Why it's often a sign of emotional maturity. And why once you accept this part of yourself, you stop feeling defensive about it altogether. At some point, you stop trying to justify it. You stop explaining why having people over feels like too much. You stop translating your need for space into something more acceptable because you finally understand what's actually happening. You're not rejecting people, you're regulating yourself. And that distinction changes everything. Home isn't just where you live. For you, it's where your nervous system recalibrates, where your thoughts slow down, where your body finally feels safe enough to rest. So when someone enters that space, even with good intentions, your system reacts. Not out of hostility, out of protection. And once you see it that way, the shame disappears. There is nothing wrong with wanting to guard your peace. Nothing selfish about choosing quiet over constant availability. Nothing cold about needing silence to feel whole. You can love people deeply and still not want them in your living room. You can be caring, warm, present, and still say, I'd rather meet outside. Those things don't cancel each other out. They support each other. Because when you honor your limits, you don't burn out. You don't resent. You don't disappear. You stay connected in a way that's sustainable. And that's what emotional maturity actually looks like. Not endless openness, not constant access, but knowing where you end and choosing to protect that space without apology. Most people never slow down enough to learn this. They keep saying yes until their kindness turns into exhaustion. They confuse discomfort with generosity. They mistake availability for love. You didn't. You noticed how your body reacts. You listened to the signal. You chose to respect it. That's not avoidance. That's awareness. And once you accept this part of yourself, something subtle shifts. You stop feeling defensive. You stop over-explaining. You stop bracing for judgment. Because you know the truth. Your need for solitude doesn't make you difficult. It makes you honest. Your boundaries don't make you distant. They make you reliable to yourself. And in a world that constantly demands more access, more energy, more noise, that kind of self-trust is rare. If this resonated, it's because people like you tend to share more than one trait. You process space, energy, and connection differently. You notice when environments feel invasive. You sense when silence is necessary. In the next video, we're going to explore another habit people like you often have. One that seems small from the outside, but reveals a lot about how your mind works and why privacy feels so important to you. If this felt familiar, the next one will feel even closer.